We are concluding a 3-week series that we have been focusing on Exodus 34. Exodus 34. And as you see here that this message this morning, we conclude that series with a message entitled, Oh, Shiny. Shiny. Thank you, Jillian, for that backup there. This is a neat message this morning. If you would, if you have not already done so, turn to Exodus 34, verse 29. Just to give you a little bit of a reminder, I know it's been a couple of weeks now, as we go back and look at this particular chapter. It has been an interesting chapter, to say the least. And I appreciate our song this morning, Debbie. I love that. That was great. I've never heard that before. That's awesome. That cracked me up. That's great. What a great message, too. Wow. And it kind of goes along a little bit with our message today, as we see where Moses went up the mountain. Went up the mountain to just spend some time with God. And God was up there on the mountain through the cloud of fire and smoke. And as he's speaking with Moses, he gives him these tablets, this message. I think you're familiar with these messages. It's the Ten Commandments. You remember that? And through that experience, he gives them these words of wisdom. And as he does that, just a great experience during that time. But God tells Moses, you need to go down the mountain and find out what's going on at the bottom of the mountain, because the Israelites are up to no good. So he goes down to the mountain and he finds the Israelites in a panic. Not because of anything that is being done to them, but in their panic, in their lack of faith, they decide to build this golden calf. And as you know, God says, never build anything that represents anything either of me or of anything to bow down to. But they did it anyway. They built this golden calf, and Moses sees this, and he is literally ticked. We see that he is so ticked that he goes down there and beats it up, the golden calf. He doesn't melt it. No. He gets mad and starts to beat it down. He beats it down so hard that it turns it and grinds it into dust. And then he gets this dust and he puts it into water. And not only does he put it into water, and he takes it to a whole new level. You know how the story goes. He says to the Israelites, you're going to drink it. Could you imagine that? Drinking gold dust? Could you imagine what that does to the system? I'm not trying to gross you out here, okay? But think about what that does to the internal organs and what happens afterwards. Okay, you think about that, okay? It's not a comfortable situation. But it does give a lasting experience. So that gives a great impression. Moses then goes to God and says, have mercy on these people. Hopefully they've learned their lesson. And at that point, Moses goes back up the mountain, takes 2 more tablets. Because when he comes down the mountain the first time, he takes those tablets, and he's so upset with the Israelites, he throws those tablets onto the rocks because, remember, he's pretty upset. And apparently, he has quite a temper. I don't know if that is merited or not that he threw those tablets down, but either way, he was pretty upset. So the second time, God tells him to come up the mountain again, take some more tablets with him, these stone tablets, and God presents to him again the words to put down on these tablets. And it is the Ten Commandments. And God spends time explaining the Ten Commandments to him. While he is up there, something amazing happens. God makes him shiny. That's the best way to explain it. He makes him shiny. He changes his appearance while he's on the mountain. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know what the appearance is, but he changes his appearance. So I want us to take a look at chapter 34, verse 29. And let's kind of use your imagination. I know for some of us on a Sunday morning it is a little difficult to use anything upstairs. But I want you to try to use your imagination. And so work with me here, okay? Moses did not notice his change, but let's look at what it says. As Moses descended from Mount Sinai with 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, as he descended the mountain, he did not realize that the skin of his face shone as a result of his speaking with the Lord. Moses had no idea what he looked like. All he knew is that while he was up there, he spoke to God again. God spoke to him, and he received these new tablets. No big deal. Just another time to hang out with God. But it says that while he was up there, he carried these tablets, and it says that as he came down, it says, with the 2 tablets of testimony. It's interesting that this word testimony is used. It is interesting that the 10 Commandments were described in this way. You know, we use a lot of different translations of Scripture in here. Some of you use King James Version. Some of you use the New King James Version. I use here to preach from today, the Holman Christian Standard Version. There's the New International Version and so forth. It's interesting that most translation uses the word testimony. Some capitalize the T in testimony. See, some of you see that? Some of you will see that the King James Version, and here what I'm using is the Holman Christian Standard Bible, it doesn't capitalize the word T in these English translations. I don't know why it's important, but it's interesting that happens. The Revised Standard Version, this translation, doesn't use the word testimony. It uses the word covenant. The word here that is best translated in some translations, the word testimony is also otherwise known as witness. So you can look at Scripture where it says, with the 2 tablets of the witness or the testimony in his hands. So basically, Moses brought down what he witnessed, or the witness of God. The message or the witness of God. The 10 Commandments were the very words, the very witness, the very testimony of God. So sometimes we kind of look over that the 10 Commandments were a bunch of do's and don'ts. But it's more than that. It is the very words, it's the very testimony, it's the very witness, it's the very expression of God in these 10 statements. And it says that he was bringing them down with him. And then it says, as he descended the mountain, that he did not realize that the skin on his face shone, according to this translation. Now, your translation may say something a little different. But because Moses witnessed this message, God changed him. Now, as you might remember, as we look at chapter 33, as we've been studying this particular message, this particular series, we know that Moses, one other time, was up on the mountain, and as he was on the mountain, he asked to see God. You remember that? And as he asked to see the face of God, God said, "You can't handle that." So we already know that God was showing himself already through the cloud of fire and smoke, as well as the rest of the Israelites at that time. But Moses asked to be able to see the God's face, and God said, "No, you can't handle that. But I'll do this for you. I will come down to you, and don't look at my face, but I will walk by you, and you can see me, the back of me." Kind of bizarre way of looking at it. But that's basically what he said. And so he walked by him, and he was able to see God in some bodily form. And it's kind of a neat way of looking at it. We don't know what that really was that he saw, but he saw something of God in a form. So it was already an expression, an experience. So he saw God in some way where it was not so overwhelming. And because he witnessed the message of God, he began to be changed. He saw God in an amazing way. He was beginning to be changed. But this time when he saw God, he was radically changed. So radical that it shone on his face, according to this translation. The word shone was not necessarily something that we've heard before. Maybe you have. But the word shone means to radiate. It radiated from his face. Now, apparently it didn't radiate from anywhere else, but it radiated from his face. Understanding that the word radiate means that there's rays, R-A-Y, rays from his face. Now, I don't think that it was like lightning and thunder exploding from his face. That would be really cool. But that's not necessarily what it was. They walk up to him, you know. But there was this radiation radiating from his face, these rays coming from his face. That would be really cool. But the problem is that they couldn't handle that. They couldn't handle this coming from his face. Matter of fact, that's where we go in verse 30. Verse 30. We see that in verse 30, not everyone understood Moses' change. It says, when Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face shone. They were afraid to come near, but Moses called out to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Again, it says that it shone from their face. This message it was an experience that they could not understand. It was something that was so hard to look at. And they were afraid to come to Moses. I don't know about you, but that freaked me out too. Here it is that the one that they've been following, the one that they've been listening to, some of them questioning who this is that's been leading them. You remember whenever they came out of Egypt? And they were going and heading towards this the Red Sea, and here it is. They're trying to figure out what to do, and they have the Egyptians behind them, and it was going to get ugly. And they're asking, "Why has he led us to our death?" And of course, the sea parted, and they walked on through, and the sea fell. And on. Remember all that? That's when they began to question. And they questioned all along the way until they got to the mountain, and then they began to question, why is Moses doing all this? And where did Moses go when he went up the mountain? Why is Moses doing this? Why is Moses doing that? And now Moses comes down the mountain and he looks the way he does. His face is radiating. His face is shown. And they're going, what is going on here? They were afraid of Moses. I don't think at that point they were questioning Moses' intentions. So much so that it was hard for them to look at. It hurt their eyes. And they ran away. And Moses said, no, you're not going to run away. You're going to come back. Come back over here. You're going to listen to me. I think at that point he realized when they feared him, when they began to run away, that there was a change. And he says, you're coming back, you're going to listen to me. And Moses' appearance was more than a window dressing. Look at verse 32. Afterward, all the Israelites came near and they commanded them to do everything the Lord had told him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. After he came out, he would tell the Israelites what he had been commanded, and the Israelites would see that Moses' face was radiant. When Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went to speak with the Lord. It's an amazing thing here. You want to get somebody's attention? Blind them with light. Okay? Does that not get somebody's attention? That is pretty much what God did with Moses. He called them over and said, okay, you're going to look at me if you want to or not. And he begins to tell them the message that God had given them and said, listen, this is the Ten Commandments and this is why we have it. This is why we're focusing on this. This is exactly why we're supposed to follow it. Oh, by the way, don't look away because you've been saying these things about me. You have not followed, but God has put me here for the very purpose of telling you this message. And then he would put this veil over. We have no idea what the veil is. We could speculate, but the veil was enough to keep the radiance from being an issue. When they couldn't handle it any longer, he would put the veil over. When it was time to tell them more, he would take the veil off and say, you're going to look at me. I don't know if you're familiar with this. As parents, you want to get your attention of your kids. Get out the pointer, right? And you look at them right in the face. You're going to look at me, right? Look at me, Ellen. Look at me. You're going to listen. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. If they're teenagers. Look at me. The rolling of the eyes. You know what I'm talking about? But as they're younger, look at me. You don't do that. And this is a way where God uses Moses to say, look at me, look what I'm telling you, look at my face, look what I've done with Moses, look at his face, don't do this or do this. You need to hear my voice. And Moses would put that veil over and they looked at him and see what God has done with him and they get it. For a little while. Kind of the same thing for our kids. Look at me. And what would happen? For a bit, they'd get it. And then they go, I don't remember that. Did you tell me that? Or my favorite is, look at me. Don't do that. Or else. Or else what? You're in big trouble, Buster. Well, that only goes so far until they actually get in trouble, right? And that's kind of how it is with God, too. He says, look at Moses. You do this, you don't do that, or you're in big trouble, Buster. And until they decided no longer to listen, God brought down the hammer. And we would see that later on in the history. It's amazing that Moses' appearance was more than just window dressing. Every time Moses met with them, he showed them who he was. Let me ask you something. Has God done something in your life? Has God changed you in your heart? Has He made such a difference in your life that people have seen, I don't know about a radiance coming from your face, a light coming from your face? That'd be kind of cool. But have they seen something in you where they can see that there is a change, or there's a difference in you that is amazing? You know, when we've experienced God, we can have that same mountaintop experience that Moses had. When we experience Christ, we cannot be different. I mean, we can be different. We cannot be the same. We must be different. When we experience Christ, we don't want to be anything else. We don't want to be how we were before we experienced Christ. We are different. The question is, do other people know that we're different? So when we are coming before other people, can they see a difference? Can they see that we've experienced God? When we truly encounter God, is there a difference in us? What are we showing them? What are we showing to people? Last week, we saw a beautiful expression how people's lives were changed. And maybe you have had a beautiful expression of how your life was changed because you have had that life change because you've come to Christ. But even in that, have people seen that change in you? Or is it just business as usual? Moses, it was obvious that he was different. Are you being shiny? Are people saying, oh, shiny? Now, of course, they're not going to say it like that. But are they saying, oh, there's something different about Bob? There's something different about George? Are they saying there's something different? As a matter of fact, I'm willing to check that out too. I'm willing to be different. I kind of like what they have. I'd like to know more. Are people seeing that? That's a question that you need to be willing to answer in your life.